The alarm tore through the station before I even understood what it meant. Red light spilled across the metal walls, doors sealed shut behind me with a heavy clang, and I stood frozen in the middle of a hallway that suddenly felt like a trap. Around me, tall figures with dark shining shells and long limbs moved with sharp, fast steps. Their eyes, black and endless, turned toward me all at once. I was the only human on that station. A voice crackled through a speaker above my head, cold and flat. Outsider detected in restricted corridor. Remain still. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I lifted both hands slowly, the way I had been trained to do if anything ever went wrong here. My name is Ethan Cole, and 3 months earlier I had been an ordinary translator working a desk job back on Earth. Now I was standing in the heart of an alien empire, surrounded by guards who could end my life before I finished a single sentence. I had not broken any rule. I had simply taken a wrong turn on my way to a meeting. But wrong turns meant something different here. On the Vraxel Hive station, every hallway belonged to someone, and every door led to a secret I was not supposed to see. 2 guards stepped closer, their sharp limbs clicking against the floor. I forced myself to stay calm, though every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. Running would have been the last mistake I ever made. "I am a registered guest," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Envoy Ethan Cole, human delegation. I took a wrong path. I mean no harm." The guards did not answer. They simply stared, weighing whether I was worth the trouble of a report or the swiftness of a blade. Then, from further down the hallway, a new voice rang out, sharp and commanding despite its youth. "Stand down. He is with me." I turned to see a Vraxel noble stepping through the parting guards, her shell a deep violet color that shimmered faintly under the lights. Her name was Sarah Veck, and though I had only met her twice before that moment, she was already the only reason I had not been thrown out of the Hive Empire within my first week. The guards hesitated, then bowed their heads and stepped aside. Sarah Veck walked straight up to me, her presence commanding even though she was young by Vraxel standards. She studied me for a moment, her dark eyes unreadable, and then she spoke in a lower tone meant only for me. "You should not wander here alone, human. This corridor belongs to the genetic archive. If the guards had not been trained to check identity chips first, you would already be gone." I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. I did not mean to end up here. I was looking for the diplomatic hall. "You are terrible at reading our signs," she said, and for a brief moment, something like amusement flickered across her sharp face. It was strange, seeing a Vraxel noble almost smile. I had been told they did not feel things the way humans did. I had been told a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. She led me away from the guards, through winding corridors lit by pale blue light, until we reached a quieter section of the station where fewer eyes could watch us. Only then did she slow her pace and let out something like a sigh. "They almost ended you," she said. "Do you understand how close that was?" "I understand," I said. "Believe me, I understand." She looked at me carefully, the way she always did, as if trying to solve a puzzle written in a language she did not fully know. "Why did Earth send you here? Of all the humans in your alliance, why you?" It was a fair question, and one I had asked myself more than once. The truth was simple, and a little humbling. I had not been chosen because I was the best. I had been chosen because no one else wanted the job. The Vraxel Hive Empire was ancient, vast, and deeply proud. Their history stretched back long before humanity had learned to write. They ruled dozens of star systems through a strict order of castes, all bound beneath a single ruler known only as the Queen Mother. Diplomacy with such a species was considered a dead end by every ambitious officer in Earth's alliance. No one expected anything to come of it. No one wanted to waste years of their career on a mission destined to fail. So they sent me. A quiet translator with no important family name, no political ambition, and no real expectation of success. I did not mind. I had always found more comfort in language and history than in the games people played to climb over each other. Being overlooked had never bothered me. If anything, it had given me room to actually think, rather than perform. They sent me because I would not embarrass anyone if I failed, I told her honestly. No one expected results. I was simply expected to survive quietly until someone more important took over. She tilted her head slightly, an expression I had learned meant curiosity among her people. And yet you are still here, still walking our halls, still speaking with me, instead of hiding in your assigned quarters like every other human envoy before you. Would you rather I hid? No, she said, and there was no hesitation in her answer. I find you more interesting than the others. We continued walking, and she began explaining the layout of the station, pointing out sections I was allowed to enter, and warning me sharply about places that could get me killed simply for standing in the wrong spot. The Vraxel did not forgive ignorance easily, but she seemed determined that I would not die from a mistake that could be avoided. It was strange how quickly she had decided to look out for me. Vraxel society did not encourage individual bonds outside of caste duty. Every relationship among her people was supposed to serve the hive, the queen, or the bloodline. Personal curiosity toward an outsider was, from what I understood, considered unusual at best and dangerous at worst. I asked her about it directly, because I had never been good at pretending not to notice things. Why help me at all? I asked. You do not owe me anything. I am not part of your hive. I am not even part of your world. She was quiet for a moment, her pace slowing as we passed beneath an archway carved with symbols I could not yet read. My people believe that everything has its place. The worker exists to build. The soldier exists to defend. The noble exists to rule. I was born to inherit a seat among the ruling houses, to continue a bloodline that has existed for countless generations. That sounds like a heavy weight to carry. It is not weight, she said. It is simply what I am. But sometimes, Ethan Cole, I wonder what it would be like to be something else, to choose, rather than to follow a path already carved before my birth. Her words settled into me quietly, and I found myself understanding her more than I expected to. I had spent my whole life being underestimated, pushed aside, treated as unimportant by people who assumed they already knew what I was capable of. She had spent her whole life carrying the opposite burden, weighed down by expectations she never chose for herself. We were different in almost every way, different species, different worlds, different histories, stretching back thousands of years apart, and yet, in that quiet hallway, lit by pale blue light, I felt something that surprised me. Not pity, not curiosity alone, something closer to recognition. Over the following weeks, our meetings became less accidental. She began arriving at the diplomatic hall during my translation sessions, offering corrections to my understanding of Vraxel customs, sometimes with sharp criticism, sometimes with quiet patience. The other envoys from Earth's alliance noticed, of course. They warned me to be careful, reminding me that friendliness with Vraxel nobility carried risks no one fully understood. The Vraxel, for their part, watched the growing familiarity between us with suspicion of their own. I did not care. For the first time since arriving on that station, surrounded by an alien empire that could crush my entire species without much effort, I felt like I was not simply surviving. I felt like I was building something, even if I did not yet know what that something would become. I did not know then how far that small, quiet friendship would eventually carry us. I did not know that the wrong turn I took in that hallway, the one that nearly cost me my life, would end up changing the future of an entire empire. I did not know that the Queen Mother herself, ruler of a species older than human civilization, would one day kneel before something neither of us had ever intended to create. All I knew, in that moment, was that Sarah Vec had chosen to protect me, a lowly human envoy with no rank and no importance, simply because she found me interesting. And somewhere beneath the fear of nearly losing my life to Vraxel guards, I found myself hoping this would not be the last time she walked beside me through those cold, blue corridors. The station hummed quietly around us, filled with 1,000 secrets I had not yet uncovered. Somewhere far above, in a chamber none of us could see, the Queen Mother continued her endless rule, unaware that a bond was quietly forming beneath her empire that would one day shake the foundations of everything her people believed to be true. But that was still to come. For now, there was only a hallway, a warning, and the beginning of something neither of us understood. The days that followed blurred together into a strange rhythm I had not expected to find on an alien station built for war and order. Each morning, I reported to the diplomatic hall, translating documents between Earth's alliance and the Vraxil ruling council. Each afternoon, without fail, Sarah Vec found some reason to appear. Sometimes she brought corrections to my reports, pointing out phrases that could be read as insults among her people. Sometimes she simply appeared at the edge of the hall, watching quietly until I finished my work, then walking beside me back toward my quarters as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The other Vraxil nobles noticed. I could feel their eyes on us whenever we passed through shared corridors, sharp and calculating, weighing what her attention toward me might mean. I asked her once if she worried about what they thought. "They think many things," she said simply. "Most of them are wrong." I laughed at that, surprising myself. Laughter had not come easily since I arrived on the station. Every day felt like walking along the edge of something dangerous, unseen rules waiting to be broken without warning. But with her, for a few stolen moments, the weight of it all seemed to lessen. It was during one of those quiet walks that she first told me about the prophecy. We had stopped near a wide viewing window overlooking a field of distant stars, the kind of view that made the vastness of everything feel almost unbearable. She stood beside me, her violet shell catching the starlight, and spoke in a tone quieter than I had heard from her before. "There is an old story among my people," she said, "passed down long before the Hive Empire became what it is now. It speaks of a bloodline growing too similar to itself, generation after generation, until it can no longer grow stronger. The old texts call it the withering. A warning against inbreeding," I said carefully, choosing my words with care. "Something like that," she said. "The story claims that one day an outsider blood would enter the royal line, not through conquest or war, but through choice, and from that joining, a new strength would rise, saving the hive from its own stagnation." I looked at her carefully, unsure whether she was simply sharing history or trying to tell me something else entirely. "Do you believe that story?" "I did not," she admitted. "Not until recently." Neither of us said anything else about it that night, but the words stayed with me long after she had gone. I told myself it was simply an old legend, the kind every culture carried in some form, a story meant to explain fears too large to face directly. I did not yet understand how much weight those words would carry in the months to come. Our closeness deepened, not through grand moments, but through small ones. She taught me how to read the shifting colors along a Vraxil noble's shell, colors that revealed emotion far more honestly than words ever could. I taught her about human music, playing recordings from Earth that she listened to with an intensity that surprised me, her sharp eyes narrowing as though trying to memorize every note. There was a moment, weeks into our growing friendship, when everything nearly fell apart. An alliance officer from Earth, a woman named Grace Whitfield who oversaw diplomatic security, called me into a private meeting after growing suspicious of how often Sarah Vec and I were seen together. "You understand the risk you are creating," Grace said, her arms crossed, her expression sharp with concern rather than anger. "A bond with Vraxil nobility is not simply a personal matter. It could be seen as political manipulation by their ruling council. It could put the entire alliance mission in danger." "We are not doing anything wrong," I said. "We are simply talking, learning from each other." "That is how everything dangerous begins," she said, "with simple talking." I did not have a good answer for her, because somewhere beneath the surface, I already knew our friendship had grown into something neither of us had planned, something that went beyond simple diplomatic curiosity. I did not yet have the words to explain it, not even to myself. Grace warned me to keep distance, for the sake of the mission and my own safety. I promised to be careful, though I already suspected that promise would not hold for long. It did not. Not long after that warning, an emergency swept through the station that neither Grace's caution nor Vraxil law could have prepared us for. A malfunction in one of the lower travel systems caused a section of the station to lose pressure control, trapping several crew members, myself and Sarah Vec included, inside a sealed section with failing life support. The emergency lights flickered around us as alarms blared through the narrow corridor. I remember gripping the edge of a metal railing, trying to steady my breathing as the air grew thinner by the minute. Sarah Vec worked quickly beside me, her sharp hands moving across a control panel, trying to reroute power before the failure became permanent. "If this does not work," she said, her voice tight with focus, "we may not have much time." "Then we make it work," I said, kneeling beside her, doing whatever I could to help, even though most of the technology was unfamiliar to me. For nearly 2 hours, we worked together in that failing section, relying on nothing but each other's determination to survive. There were no guards to protect us, no rank or title to shield us from the danger. There was only the two of us, fighting against a system that did not care whether we were Vraxil or human. When the power finally rerouted and the air began to clear, we sat together against the cold metal wall, breathing hard, relief flooding through both of us in a way that neither species needed words to explain. "You did not run," she said quietly, looking at me with an expression I had never quite seen on her before. "Even when the air grew thin, even when you could have simply saved yourself, you stayed." "I was not going to leave you," I said simply. "That was never an option." Something shifted between us in that moment, something neither of us tried to name aloud. It was not something built from diplomatic curiosity or careful conversation. It was something forged in fear, in survival, in the simple decision to stand beside someone rather than abandon them. Neither of us understood then just how deep that bond would eventually root itself, or how it would one day be discovered by the very geneticists who guarded the Hive Empire's bloodline with obsessive precision. Neither of us understood that the old prophecy she had mentioned beneath the stars was not simply a story meant to be admired from a distance. We only knew, in that quiet moment, after nearly losing our lives together, that whatever connection had formed between us was no longer something either of us could simply walk away from. And far above us, deep within the Hive's ruling chambers, forces neither of us could yet see, were already beginning to notice changes stirring quietly within the Empire's most guarded bloodline. In the weeks after the emergency, something between Sarah Vec and I deepened in ways I struggled to fully understand. It was not simply friendship anymore, though neither of us used any other word to describe it. It existed in quiet gestures, shared meals taken in private corners of the station, long conversations that stretched late into artificial night cycles neither of us wanted to end. I began learning more about Vraxil culture, beyond what any official briefing had prepared me for. Their society, though rigid in structure, carried deep traditions of loyalty and honor that reminded me, oddly enough, of stories from Earth's own ancient history. Sarah Vec explained how bonding rituals among her people were rarely spoken of openly, considered deeply personal, tied not just to companionship but to a transfer of trust between bloodlines. "There is a ritual," she told me one evening, her voice quieter than usual. "An old tradition, rarely practiced now, meant to bind two individuals through shared intention rather than duty. It was once symbolic, meant to represent unity between differing hive houses." "Symbolic how?" I asked. "A joining of essence," she said carefully, "meant to be understood as spiritual, not literal." I did not think much of it at the time. It sounded like an old custom, similar to marriage traditions from Earth's history, meaningful in ceremony but without any deeper biological weight. Neither of us realized then how dangerously outdated that assumption truly was. We performed the ritual one quiet evening, more out of curiosity and closeness than any real understanding of its consequences. It felt, at the time, like an act of trust between two people who had already risked their lives for each other. It felt like something meaningful, something private, something that belonged only to us. Neither of us understood, in that moment, that Vraxel biology carried secrets even their own scholars had long forgotten. What had once been symbolic, generations ago, had somehow remained biologically active within certain bloodlines, especially within the royal line Sarah Vec had been born into. We did not know what we had triggered until it was already far too late to undo. The warning came without any gentleness at all. Guards burst into my quarters before dawn, their sharp limbs slamming against the metal doorframe as they forced their way inside. I had barely opened my eyes before rough hands pulled me from my bed, dragging me into the corridor with a force that left my shoulder aching. "What is happening?" I shouted, struggling uselessly against their grip. "What did I do?" None of them answered. Their eyes carried something I had never seen from Vraxel soldiers before, not simple suspicion, but something closer to alarm bordering on fear. They marched me through corridors I did not recognize, past nobles who stopped and stared as I passed, whispering among themselves in a language too fast for me to fully catch. I was thrown into a holding chamber, cold metal walls surrounding me on every side, a single light flickering above. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing through every possible explanation. Had someone discovered the ritual Sarah Vec and I performed? Had I broken some unspoken law simply by growing close to her? When the door finally opened again, it was not a guard who entered, but a Vraxel geneticist, her shell pale gray, marked with symbols denoting high rank within the genetic archive. She studied me with an expression somewhere between disbelief and quiet horror. "Do you understand what you have done?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, despite her clear attempt to remain composed. "I do not understand anything," I said honestly. "No one has told me what is happening." She stepped closer, placing a small device on the table between us. A holographic image flickered to life above it, showing something that looked like a cluster of developing larvae, faint markings glowing along their small forming bodies. "These are the newest brood within the royal nursery," she said. "Born from Sarah Vec's line, carrying genetic markers that should not exist within our species." My chest tightened. What kind of markers? "Markers of resilience patterns never before recorded in Vraxel biology," she said. "Markers that align, disturbingly, with human genetic structure." The room seemed to spin around me. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself against a truth I had not been prepared to face. The ritual, the bond we had shared, believing it to be nothing more than symbolic tradition. It had not simply been ceremony. It had been real, in ways neither of us understood until this exact moment. "That is not possible," I whispered, though even as I said it, I knew somehow that it was true. "It should not be possible," the geneticist said, "and yet here it is, undeniable within every strand of their genetic code." Before I could respond further, more guards entered, their movements sharper now, their intent unmistakable. They seized me again, pulling me from the chamber, marching me through corridors filled with murmuring nobles who now looked at me with open hostility rather than simple curiosity. I was brought before a gathering of ruling house representatives, a wide circular chamber filled with sharp voices arguing over what my presence meant for their empire. Some called for immediate execution, insisting I had somehow sabotaged their bloodline through forbidden means. Others argued that such an act, if proven intentional, was an act of war against the entire Hive Empire. I stood in the center of that chamber, surrounded by voices calling for my death, feeling smaller and more powerless than I ever had in my life. "I did not know," I said, my voice barely carrying over the noise. Neither of us understood what the ritual truly meant. It was never our intention to cause harm. My words did little to calm the storm around me. A tall Vraxil noble stepped forward, his shell marked in deep red, a color I had learned meant fury among his people. "Ignorance does not undo consequence," he said coldly. You have tainted a bloodline that has remained pure for countless generations. For that, there can be only one answer. Guards moved to seize me once more, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I truly believed my life would end within that chamber, far from home, misunderstood by an empire that had never fully trusted me to begin with. Then Sarah Veck's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Stop." The chamber fell silent as she stepped forward, her presence commanding despite the danger surrounding her. Guards hesitated, unsure whether to obey a noble who now stood at the center of the very controversy, threatening to tear the ruling houses apart. "This was not an act of sabotage," she said, her voice steady despite the weight pressing down on her. "This was a choice I made freely, alongside someone I have come to trust and care for deeply. If blame must be placed, it belongs equally to me." Murmurs spread through the chamber, disbelief mixing with outrage. The red-marked noble stepped toward her, his voice sharp with accusation. "You would claim responsibility for corrupting our bloodline. I would claim responsibility for choosing my own path," she said, "rather than following one carved for me before my birth." Her words silenced the room more effectively than any argument could have. Even those calling loudest for my execution seemed unsure how to respond to a noble openly defying the expectations placed upon her since birth. Before the chaos could resume, a new presence entered the chamber, one that caused every Vraxil within the room to fall into immediate, complete silence. Guards lowered their weapons, nobles bowed their heads low. Even the air within the chamber seemed to shift, heavier now, charged with an authority I had not yet witnessed during my time on the station. The Queen Mother had arrived. She moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so ancient, her shell a deep, endless black, marked with faint golden lines that shimmered like something out of legend. Her eyes, sharper than any I had seen among her people, swept across the room before settling on me. I had heard stories about the Queen Mother since my arrival, whispered accounts of her power, her wisdom, her absolute control over the empire she had ruled for longer than most Vraxil could remember. None of those stories prepared me for the weight of actually standing before her. "Explain," she said simply, her voice quiet, yet carrying more authority than every raised voice that had filled the chamber moments before. The geneticist stepped forward, presenting the same holographic image she had shown me earlier, the developing larvae marked with genetic patterns unlike anything within Vraxil history. The Queen Mother studied the image in silence for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "These markers," she said finally, "are they confirmed?" "Confirmed and undeniable, my queen," the geneticist answered. "The bloodline carries human genetic resilience patterns, merged directly into the royal line." Silence stretched through the chamber, as every noble waited to see how the Queen Mother would respond. I braced myself for judgment, certain that whatever mercy Sarah Veck had bought me would end the moment the Queen Mother chose to speak her verdict. Instead, something happened that no one in that chamber, myself included, could have possibly predicted. The Queen Mother's eyes lingered on the image a moment longer, and then, slowly, her legs folded beneath her as she lowered herself down before the holographic display, kneeling in a gesture I had never once seen from any Vraxil noble, let alone their supreme ruler. Gasps spread through the chamber. Guards shifted uncomfortably, uncertain how to respond to a display none of them had context for. "My grandchildren," she whispered, her voice carrying something that sounded almost like disbelief mixed with reverence. "Born of a human." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I did not yet fully understand. I looked toward Sarah Veck, searching her face for some explanation, but she looked just as stunned as everyone else in that chamber. The Queen Mother remained kneeling for a long moment before rising slowly, her expression now calm, though something had visibly shifted within her. "There is an old prophecy," she said, her voice carrying through the silent chamber, "written long before any of you were born, warning of a withering that would one day threaten our bloodline. It spoke of an outsider joining, chosen freely, rather than forced, that would restore strength to a lineage grown too similar to itself across countless generations. She turned toward the red-marked noble who had called for my execution moments earlier. "You called this an act of corruption." "I call it the fulfillment of a promise our ancestors feared we would never see." The noble lowered his head, though I could see doubt still lingering behind his sharp eyes. Others within the chamber exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to trust the words of their queen or the deep unease still coiling within their traditions. The Queen Mother turned back toward me, studying me with an intensity that made my chest tighten all over again, though this time fear had shifted into something closer to uncertainty about what would come next. "You," she said, "the human who unknowingly changed the future of my empire. Do you understand the weight of what has happened here?" "I am only beginning to understand it," I admitted honestly. "Then you will have time to learn," she said, "for whether by fate, by chance, or by the strength of choice, you are now bound to this bloodline in ways that cannot be undone." I did not know, in that moment, whether her words carried relief or a new kind of danger entirely. I looked toward Sarah Vec, and for the first time since guards had dragged me from my quarters that morning, I saw something steady return to her expression. We had survived the chamber. We had survived the accusation of sabotage, but as murmurs of doubt continued rippling through the ruling houses around us, I understood, with a growing weight settling into my chest, that surviving that moment was only the beginning of a much larger storm still waiting to unfold. The bloodline had changed. The prophecy had been spoken aloud before the entire ruling council, and somewhere within that chamber, among nobles who still eyed me with suspicion despite the Queen Mother's declaration, I could sense that not everyone believed her words would be enough to settle what had already begun. Peace, if it could even be called that, did not last long. Within days of the Queen Mother's declaration, whispers spread through every level of the Hive Empire, carried from noble houses down to worker castes who had never before concerned themselves with matters of bloodline succession. Some welcomed the news with quiet hope, believing the prophecy fulfilled meant strength and renewal for a species that had, for generations, felt itself slowly weakening beneath the weight of its own sameness. Others saw only danger. I learned quickly that not every noble house shared the Queen Mother's reverence for old prophecy. Several rival houses, long jealous of the direct royal bloodline's authority, viewed the hybrid children not as a miracle, but as a vulnerability to be exploited. If the line could be altered once by an outsider, they argued in private council chambers I was never meant to hear about, then perhaps it could be challenged entirely. Sarah Vec warned me of the danger building around us during one of our quiet evenings together, her voice tense with worry she rarely allowed herself to show. "House Dravantak has requested a formal review of succession law," she said. "They intend to argue that hybrid heirs cannot legally inherit authority within the empire." "Can they actually do that?" I asked. "They can try," she said. "And if they succeed in convincing enough of the ruling council, our children could be stripped of any claim to protection or title. Worse, some among their house have spoken of ensuring the bloodline never reaches maturity at all." The weight of her words settled heavily into my chest. It was one thing to fear political maneuvering. It was another to understand that entire noble houses might be willing to see infants harmed simply to protect old traditions from change. I found myself drawn deeper into the political web of the Hive Empire than I had ever expected, no longer simply a translator caught in unfamiliar territory, but a figure now tied directly to the Empire's uncertain future. Every movement I made was watched. Every conversation I held was analyzed for hidden meaning. I was no longer simply Ethan Cole, quiet envoy from Earth. I was, whether I wanted the title or not, father to children whose existence threatened the foundation of an ancient empire's most guarded traditions. Earth's Alliance Council did not make things easier. Grace Whitfield summoned me for an emergency meeting shortly after news of the hybrid bloodline reached Alliance Command. Her expression carried none of the warmth I had grown used to during our earlier conversations. This was business, serious and unforgiving. "Do you understand what you have created?" she asked, pacing across the small briefing room we had been given aboard the station. "A human bloodline now sits within alien royal succession. Every government back home is going to ask what this means for Alliance security." "I did not plan this," I said. "Neither of us did." "That does not matter anymore," she said. "What matters now is how this is used. If rival factions within the Vraxil Empire see this as manipulation, they may retaliate against Earth itself. If our own Alliance leaders see this as an opportunity for influence over Vraxil succession, they may try to use your children as leverage." Her words struck harder than I wanted to admit. I had spent so much time worrying about Vraxil politics that I had not fully considered what humanity's own leaders might attempt once they understood the potential influence tied to this unexpected bloodline. "I will not allow my children to become a political tool," I said firmly. "Not for the Vraxil houses, and not for Earth's alliance either." Grace studied me for a long moment before finally nodding, though worry still lingered clearly behind her eyes. "Then you had better prepare yourself, Ethan, because from this moment forward, every side is going to try pulling you and those children in different directions." She was right, of course. Within weeks, I found myself caught between competing pressures from every angle imaginable. Rival Vraxil houses sent quiet threats disguised as formal diplomatic language, warning that the hybrid heir's safety could not be guaranteed unless certain political demands were met. Meanwhile, ambitious members of Earth's own alliance leadership began proposing quiet strategies to use the bloodline connection as leverage for expanded trade agreements and technological exchange. Through it all, Sarah Veck remained steady beside me, though the toll of constant political maneuvering weighed visibly upon her. She had been raised within this world of careful diplomacy and inherited duty, yet even she seemed unprepared for the intensity of the storm now surrounding our small family. The first real attempt against the children came quietly, almost unnoticed, disguised as a routine inspection of the royal nursery. I remember the alarm in Sarah Veck's voice when she contacted me late one night, her words rushed and sharp with urgency. Someone attempted to access the nursery's environmental controls. If the guards had not caught the intrusion in time, the atmospheric balance could have been altered enough to harm the entire brood. My blood ran cold. Who was responsible? "We do not know for certain," she said. "But the access came through credentials linked to House Dravantak." I did not wait for further instruction. I made my way immediately to the nursery, ignoring protocol, ignoring the risk of being seen breaking through restricted corridors without authorization. When I arrived, I found Sarah Veck already standing guard beside the sealed chamber, her posture rigid with barely controlled anger. Inside, protected behind reinforced glass, the small forming shapes of our children rested quietly, unaware of how close danger had come to reaching them. I stood there for a long moment, staring at those fragile, developing lives, feeling something shift within me that went far beyond simple fear. "We cannot rely on the Queen Mother's protection alone," I said finally. "If House Dravantak is willing to risk direct sabotage, they will not stop with one failed attempt." "Then what do you propose?" Sarah Veck asked. "We build alliances of our own," I said. "Among nobles who see the prophecy as truth rather than threat. Among Earth's Alliance Council members who understand the danger of political exploitation. We cannot fight this from the shadows alone." Over the following weeks, I worked tirelessly, meeting quietly with sympathetic Vraxil nobles who still respected the old prophecy, as well as trusted members of Earth's alliance who valued protecting innocent lives over political advantage. It was slow, careful work, filled with constant risk of exposure, yet piece by piece, a fragile network of protection began forming around the children. The Queen Mother, though bound by tradition to remain publicly neutral in matters of noble house disputes, quietly ensured additional security measures were placed around the nursery, her actions speaking louder than any words she was allowed to offer directly. Despite these efforts, House Dravantak grew bolder rather than more cautious. Reports began surfacing of secret meetings among several rival noble houses, whispered plans of a coordinated strike meant to eliminate the hybrid bloodline entirely before it could mature into any real challenge to the existing power structure. I understood, with growing certainty, that quiet diplomacy alone would not be enough to protect what Sarah Vec and I had unintentionally created. Something larger was coming, a storm that would test not only the fragile alliances we had built, but the very willingness of an ancient empire to accept a future none of its traditions had prepared it for. Standing beside Sarah Vec outside the nursery one final evening before everything came to a head, I found myself thinking back to the quiet hallway where we first truly spoke, back when neither of us understood how deeply our lives would eventually intertwine. "Are you afraid?" she asked me quietly. "Yes," I admitted, but not enough to stop fighting for them. She reached out, her sharp hand resting gently against mine, an act of comfort that would have seemed impossible between our two species not long ago. Then we face what comes together. Neither of us spoke further that night. We simply stood there, side by side, guarding the fragile future, sleeping quietly behind reinforced glass, unaware that the storm both of us had been dreading was only days away from finally breaking loose. The attack came at night, when the station's corridors were quietest and its guards were spread thinnest across their rotations. I woke to the sound of distant alarms, sharper and more urgent than any drill I had heard before. Sarah Vec was already moving, pulling on her armor plating with quick, practiced motions. Her expression hardened with a focus I had not seen from her since the day we nearly lost our lives together in that failing corridor. "House Dravantak has moved," she said. "Their forces are attempting to breach the royal nursery directly." My stomach dropped. "How many?" "More than we expected," she said. "They have grown desperate enough to risk open conflict rather than continue working through political channels." We moved quickly through the station, guided by emergency lighting that painted the corridors in flashes of red. Around us, loyal guards clashed with intruders wearing House Dravantak markings, their weapons sparking against reinforced walls as the fight spread closer to the heart of the station. I had never been trained for combat. I was a translator, a diplomat, someone who solved problems through words rather than weapons. Yet as we ran through those chaotic corridors, I understood clearly that words would do nothing to stop what was already unfolding. We reached the outer defense line surrounding the nursery just as a group of intruders breached through a side corridor, catching several guards off balance. Sarah Vec moved without hesitation, engaging the nearest attacker with sharp, controlled strikes, her training as a noble clearly extending beyond simple politics. I grabbed a fallen guard's weapon, unfamiliar and heavy in my hands, doing my best to defend the position rather than attack outright. My focus remained solely on buying enough time, protecting the entrance long enough for reinforcements to arrive. "Ethan, behind you," Sarah Vec shouted. I turned just in time to block an incoming strike, the force of it knocking me backward against the wall. My arms ached from the impact, but I forced myself back onto my feet, refusing to let fear paralyze me while the safety of our children hung in the balance. The fight stretched on longer than I could measure, adrenaline blurring the passage of time. Guards loyal to the Queen Mother eventually arrived in greater numbers, pushing back House Dravantak's forces corridor by corridor. Yet even as their attack faltered, I could sense the true danger had not yet fully arrived. It came in the form of the red-marked noble who had first called for my execution days earlier, stepping through the chaos with a small group of elite soldiers, his expression cold and determined. "You should have been eliminated the moment your presence was discovered," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the fading sounds of battle. "This ends now." He moved toward the nursery entrance with singular focus, clearly intent on ensuring the hybrid bloodline never survived the night. Saravek placed herself directly in his path, her stance unwavering despite the exhaustion visible across her features. "You will not pass," she said simply. "You would defend an outsider's offspring over the future of your own people?" he demanded. "I would defend my children," she said, "because that is what they are, not a threat to our future itself." He hesitated only a moment before pressing forward, clearly unwilling to be swayed by words alone. I stepped up beside her, weapon raised despite my exhaustion, refusing to let her stand alone against what was coming. Before the conflict could escalate further, a new presence entered the corridor, one that instantly silenced every remaining sound of struggle around us. The Queen Mother had arrived, flanked by a full contingent of her most loyal guards, her expression carrying none of the calm patience I had witnessed during our earlier meeting. This time, her presence radiated something closer to controlled fury. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. The red-marked noble froze, clearly caught between defiance and the instinctive submission bred into every Vraxil toward their supreme ruler. "My queen, this bloodline threatens everything our empire has built across countless generations. This bloodline," she said, stepping forward slowly, "is the very thing that will save our empire from the slow decline every scholar within the genetic archive has quietly feared for centuries. And you would destroy it out of fear rooted in outdated pride. They are not truly Vraxil," he argued, though his voice wavered slightly under her unwavering gaze. "They are exactly what our ancestors once prayed for," she said. "A joining of strength, chosen freely rather than forced. You call it corruption, I call it survival." She turned toward her guards, her voice sharpening with clear command. "Restrain him. His actions tonight constitute treason against the crown." Guards moved quickly, securing the noble despite his continued protests. The remaining House Dreventak forces, seeing their leader captured and the Queen Mother's guards now firmly in control, laid down their weapons rather than continue a fight they could no longer win. As the chaos finally settled, the Queen Mother turned toward Saravek and me, her expression softening slightly, though the weight of authority never fully left her presence. "You held this line, despite overwhelming odds," she said. "Both of you." "We had no other choice," I said honestly. "They are our children. Protecting them was never something we could simply walk away from." The Queen Mother studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind her sharp eyes that I had not seen from her before. "There is something within your kind, human, that I have come to understand only through this conflict. A refusal to abandon what you have chosen to protect, regardless of the danger against you. It is not unique to us," I said. "I believe your daughter carries that same strength." Saravek looked toward me, something warm flickering briefly across her expression, despite the exhaustion still weighing on both of us. The Queen Mother nodded slowly, turning her attention back toward the nursery entrance, where the fragile forms of our children remained safely protected behind reinforced glass, untouched by the chaos that had raged so close to them throughout the night. "This conflict has proven something even the old prophecy could not fully capture," she said. "It is not simply bloodline that will carry our empire into a stronger future. It is the willingness to protect what we choose to value, regardless of tradition or fear." In the weeks that followed, the political landscape of the Hive Empire shifted more dramatically than anyone could have predicted. House Dreventak's failed coup weakened their standing significantly among the ruling council, while houses that had once hesitated to support the hybrid bloodline began quietly aligning themselves with the Queen Mother's declaration. Earth's Alliance Council, initially fearful of the political complications tied to my unexpected role within Vraxil succession, eventually recognized the unprecedented opportunity now standing before them. A formal treaty began taking shape, one built not on simple trade agreements or cautious diplomacy, but on a genuine blood-bound alliance between two civilizations that had never expected to grow so closely intertwined. Grace Whitfield, once deeply skeptical of everything unfolding around me, eventually became one of the treaty's strongest advocates, recognizing that the bond between Sarah Veck and I had created something far more valuable than either government could have engineered through careful negotiation alone. The Queen Mother, in a rare public address before the full ruling council, formally recognized our children as legitimate heirs within the royal bloodline, their future protection guaranteed not simply through tradition, but through her direct decree. I stood beside Sarah Veck during that address, watching as generations of rigid Vraxil tradition slowly began bending toward a future none of us could have predicted when I first stumbled into a restricted corridor months earlier, expecting nothing more than a quiet, forgettable diplomatic assignment. Instead, I had found something far greater than I ever imagined possible, a bond stretching across two entire civilizations, a family formed not through simple chance, but through shared courage in the face of overwhelming danger, a future for our children that no longer rested solely on old fears, but on the strength of choice, loyalty, and the refusal to abandon what truly mattered. Standing at the edge of the nursery one final evening, watching our children rest peacefully behind glass that no longer needed extra guards to protect it, Sarah Veck turned toward me with an expression I had come to recognize as something deeply personal, reserved only for the quiet moments between us. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked. "The danger, the political storm, the life this has forced upon you?" I thought back to that very first night, guards dragging me from my quarters, uncertain whether I would survive the chamber I was thrown into. I thought about every threat, every political maneuver, every moment where losing everything had felt only a breath away. "No," I said honestly, "not for a single moment." She reached for my hand, her sharp fingers intertwining gently with mine, both of us watching quietly as our children slept peacefully within a future neither empire had ever expected, yet one that both would now carry forward together. The Hive Empire and Earth's alliance stood bound in ways neither civilization could have imagined possible. And somewhere within that quiet nursery, beneath the soft glow of protective lighting, the next chapter of two entirely different worlds had already begun, carried forward not by conquest, not by tradition, but by the simple, unshakable choice to stand beside one another, no matter the cost.